Revolutionary greetings, comrades. This is Comrade Pigeon Odimwengu. I'm a co-chair of Consciousness Study Group. We are a group of course, Africans who study philosophy of Secretary Dr. Kwame Nkrumah for liberating Africa, developing Africa, and uniting Africa. With us here is the chair of that class, Brother Kwame Christian.
Sorry, Pigman, your voice is very quiet, brother.
Okay, allow me ask Brother Kwame Goza to introduce us officially to this class before we start. Brother Kwame?
Yeah, thank you. I hope you can all hear me. So, as Brother Pigeon said, this is Christian Kwame Agbotsa. We would like to welcome you all to our Saturday class. And our Saturday classes are an extension of our Thursday classes. And for those who attend, our Thursday classes are classes on which we focus on philosophy and ideology. Not just any philosophy and ideology, but the philosophy and the ideology of Pan-Africanism. There are three types of Pan-Africanism, as we all know. The first is conservative Pan-Africanism. The second, liberal Pan-Africanism. And the third, radical Pan-Africanism, or if you like, progressive Pan-Africanism. Progressive Pan-Africanism is the Pan-Africanism represented by Osajifo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And that is the philosophy that we examine through reading his book on this very topic, which he called Colonization. So on Thursdays, we read and discuss our thinking. The sole purpose being to conscientize Africans on the importance of the materialist philosophy and ideology for the total liberation, unification, and development of Africa. The philosophy of idealism can never, I repeat, never liberate, unite, and develop us, because inherently it is incapable of doing that. So on Thursday, we discuss, we read, discuss, and we share our thinking. On Saturdays, as we are met here today, we then have a conversation as Africans on the total liberation, unification, and development of Africa. And the reason we are having these Saturday meetings is because on the ground, ordinary Africans are not discussing unification. Ordinary Africans are not talking about the importance of unifying Africa. Yes, there are Pan-African groups here and there, whether conservative, liberal, or radical, talking about it. But ordinary Africans, in their workplaces, in the markets, in their schools, whether primary, secondary, or university, and so on, are not discussing Pan-Africanism. And so one of the purposes of this Saturday is to begin to have that conversation. And we are hoping that through this, ordinary people will begin to have that conversation. Because the transformation of Africa is not going to happen because liberals want it. I mean, liberal Africans, or because conservative Africans want it. It will happen when the majority of the continent put their heart and their soul behind it. And when the people are united, they can never be defeated. So welcome to you all, and today, and we hope that you'll be part of that conversation. And thank you also for coming. Brother Pigeon, I believe the topic today is to do with what you called or shared with us, which is the doctrine of discovery. Is that correct? My opinion?
Yes, that's correct, Brother Kwame.
Okay, so before we launch into it, let's hear some news on what is happening around the world with respect to our continent. And I suppose before that, Brother Pigeon, can you share with us the rationale for this, for discussing this topic today? Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Kwame, and thank everyone who is here with us. Now, today, I intended to pick this topic on the doctrines of discovery. Having understood clearly how much it involves our material possession as Africans. As we've said, as a class whom we believe too much and actually base our ideology on materialist position, we believe that the material welfare of the matter is primary to us before other derivatives, which either spirituality or anything else. And therefore, our material possession as Africans, our land and our people were actually taken and actually destroyed by those who invaded us in whatever angle they were in their spirituality or in their idealist mentality. They came through idealist mentality to take over our material possession. And this class today is very clear to connect with the three agenda of Africa on liberation. That in order to liberate Africa, we must realize that we must fight first and fight back to our material position first, and not actually fight further on their idealism position or their spirituality. Because actually, their idealism position was used in order to take over our material being or our material welfare as Africa. And therefore, the rationale for this discussion today is to tap towards us possessing back our material possession in order to develop Africa using our material possession. And beyond that is to realize that the division that was created in terms of countries, they call countries through the Berlin Wall, was actually for their interests and instigated by them. And therefore, we must look beyond that and not confine ourselves within those boundaries and realize that we must actually go back towards pushing for our unity as Africa and the unity of nations within Africa. So it's three-dimension angle to this discussion. By learning what happened and by learning the tools they use in idealist position in order to attack and take over our material possession, and by understanding that our current situation of division of countries, or we call them the Berlin conferences, was not actually our interest, as we all know, but actually still serve their interests and not our interests. And therefore, we must forego those borders in order to achieve and attain what we as a class propose and what we as a class champion, a united Africa. Because only that unity can help us fully to reclaim our possession and fully defend it and develop Africa using it. But Kwame, that's my position and rationale behind this discussion.
Okay, thank you very much. So going forward, then, can you chair the first session where we hear from anyone here who wants to share some kind of news on what is happening on the African continent with respect to either liberation, unification, or development. So the floor is open. If you want to share any thoughts on this as a conversation, what is the news? What is happening where you are that you would like to bring to our attention as Africans? So the floor is open. Brother Pigeon, if you'd like to share this part, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like, first of all, to recognize the presence of Sam Motua. Sam Motau is from Pan-African Congress in Azania, the one who was looking for us to come up with what he called the Pan-African immigration policy. I know, Brother Kwame, you can remember that some times back.
Yes.
So Sam Motua today has joined us, and his hand is up, and allow him to actually, first of all, come in and introduce himself to the class and also share with us what is update from South Africa. Then we'll go to DJ Mr. P. Sam Motua, kindly welcome.
Thank you, everybody, and good evening. Greetings from Azania, South Africa. It's my first time to join. I don't even join the Thursday classes, so it's my first time to join the group, and I'm really grateful for this. as Brother Pigeon has said, I am a serving member of the National Executive of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania in South Africa, which was established in 1958 as a group of the Pan-Africanists that moved away from the liberal African National Congress in the 1960s. Currently, what I want to report is that the oldest liberation movement in Africa, the African National Congress, is celebrating its 112th year today. This I just want to report because over 112 years of a liberation struggle, the people of South Africa are in dire straits as we speak. So this is what Pan-Africanists must answer, that for 112 years of a liberation movement and the people are still struggling. And secondly, despite that, South Africa as a country have lodged with the International Court of Justice the case of genocide against the state of Israel. And I think members are aware that South Africa's case was presented on Thursday, and yesterday the Israeli government was replying. And currently, as we speak, we are waiting for the International Court of Justice to give its verdict. That is the situation I wanted to report. And we, as the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, are preparing ourselves for the coming election, which is currently being not yet with a date of the election, but we expect somewhere around May that the elections in South Africa will take place. There's a jostle of political groupings in the country, and everybody is trying to oust the African National Congress because our people feel it has been a struggle too long, and freedom and liberation, true liberation of the people is still missing. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Samotua. Motau, of course, I know Brother Kwame actually resonates a lot with the Pan-African Congress of Azania. Thank you for at last joining us. Of course, you were not getting updates before, but I've added you in our mailing list, so you'll be getting further updates of our classes. Permit me also to recognize the presence of Satish, who is from the northern part of Africa. They call it northern part of Africa, but a very good friend for some time. I see he's here with us. And we appreciate your presence, Satish. If you'll be willing to say something or share something from the northern part of Africa, it will be our pleasure to have it. DJ Mr. P, can you share something?
Thank you, Pigman. Greetings, everybody. Peace and Pan-Africanism to everyone. First things, I had my hand up for a while because I wanted to ask Christian. There's something that you said earlier, Christian, using the word inherently regarding things are not going to change. I missed what you said, and I was hoping that you would repeat it. So I just wanted to ask if you could repeat what it was that you said you were talking, because you're saying that if we don't apply something, if we don't do something, then nothing's going to change. So if you're able to respond to that, Christian, please, before I come up with the current news. If you can recall that. Christian?
Yes. Yeah, so I was explaining that there are two philosophical positions currently on our planet. The first being materialism, the second being idealism. I was making the point that idealism cannot liberate, unite, and develop us. That's the point I was making. Thank you.
Okay. No, that's great. I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah, I'm with you on that. Also, you mentioned the three types of Pan-Africanism: conservatism, liberalism, and progressive Pan-Africanism. Could you kindly elaborate on those three different types, please?
Yes, I'll do so from the point of view of wealth. As Brother Pigeon has explained, the whole point of imperialism, colonialism, and neocolonialism is the property of Africans. That is what it's all about. It's all about property.
Resources and
property, whether it's a property inside the ground, on the ground, or above the ground, including the property, including seeing us Africans as property.
Yeah.
Now, from that point of view, there are three types of Pan-Africanisms. Because when we talk about Pan-Africanism, sometimes we think that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, but we are all not.
Correct, because as you just defined, you've got three different types.
So the conservative Pan-Africans want the wealth of Africa only for themselves as individuals, their immediate families, and foreigners.
That's who's in charge at the moment. They're conservative.
They are those, yes. Most of them are presidents right now. That's conservative Pan-Africanism. Now, liberal Pan-Africans also talk about Pan-Africanism only from the liberal point of view. And in terms of wealth, they just want their own nationality, what we call tribe. So if they are from a particular tribe, or a particular area, they just want the wealth for that tribe or that group. They are not interested in ensuring that the wealth is applied to the wealth of all the people, even in their territory.
Yeah.
So liberals are only interested in a minority of Africans being very wealthy.
Correct.
And some of these people, in South Africa, for instance, what has happened is that they have embraced liberal economics. And neoliberal economics principally is about making a few people very wealthy.
Yeah,
and that's why a lot of the leaders are very wealthy, but the majority of the people are poor. So liberal Pan-Africanism is not interested in applying the wealth of Africa for the benefit of all Africans. Only progressive Pan-Africanism, or progressive Pan-Africanism,
can do that.
Because we believe that the welfare of the African people is the supreme law.
Period.
That the wealth of Africa must be applied for the benefit of ordinary Africans, and that the wealth of Africa must go towards the continuous improvement of the welfare of ordinary African people. That means all Africans.
Wherever we are. Period.
That is the third type of Pan-Africanism, and it was led by none other by Osagifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. His overthrow in 1966 and the aftermath of what has happened and what is happening today, when we can see the liberals and the conservatives. Right now in Africa, the liberals and the conservatives have total power. We progressives have been, if you like, sidelined. Sidelined.
Yeah.
And so what we need is for the progressives now to
rise
also
up.
Look at how we can reorganize ourselves in order to basically take over political power and then begin to change what needs to be changed. So in terms of your question, I hope I've answered it.
Beautiful. No, beautiful response. I fully understand now. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's beautiful. The only problem I see that I identify with the liberals is they will probably eventually evolve into conservatives.
In fact, the whole point of neoliberalism, I don't know if you recall, you're talking about the late 1970s and going forward. The whole point of neoliberalism, I don't know if people know that, but conservatism as a philosophy has no economic theory.
Right.
So what they do is that they hang on to liberal economic theory. And so the whole neoliberal movement was actually, from the 1970s, the coming together of conservatives and liberals becoming one force. And that is why, for instance, in England today, you can't see the difference between Labour and conservatives.
There is a difference
on the same hymn sheet.
Correct. Absolutely. I got you, brother. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. And regarding an update on the news and what's going on, for me, two things. The brother that just spoke before me, I think it was Sam, he mentioned about two things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about Ghana, and I wanted to talk about what's going on over in Gaza, right, over in the Middle East. So Sam mentioned earlier the Middle East and South Africa taking them to the ICC, etc. Now, as Africans and Pan-Africanists, what is our concern with what is going on in the Middle East? And I say that I have my reasons. I just wanted to get some responses from you all here as to why we should be concerned about what's going on in the Middle East. So that's an open question for anybody to come back on. If you are concerned about it, or if you're not concerned about it, I just really wanted to hear if you are and why, and if not and why.
Yeah, but
that's not it.
Yeah, but with due respect, that is a different question. What Brother Pigeon is sharing is news from the continent.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we need to follow what the chair is saying. Yeah.
All right. Sorry. If I drifted off. Okay. So I'm only responding to Sam's point. So what I will talk about then, in terms of news, is what happened last weekend. I don't know if everybody knows about it, but the conference that took place in Ghana last weekend, with Dr. Arakana, PLO Lumumba, Peter Obi, and Cheddar. Yeah. I'm assuming everybody here knows about that. So I think that's the headline. It was cancelled by none other but, of course, the short man of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo. We believe he cancelled it. He says his reason for cancelling it was a double booking, which I don't believe for a second. But the news was that they were having this massive conference, which was pre-booked and paid for back in November, and it was cancelled literally an hour or two before it was meant to go ahead. So that's an item of news.
Yeah, thank you for that, for the DJ Mr. P. Thank you for that. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. I would like to give guidance a bit that we may take the newsletter, because my presentation might take close to an hour, 45 minutes. And based on our time, is almost 31 minutes plus our time. And we need to have some session for reaction towards the presentation. And therefore, with the guidance, of course, permission from Brother Christian Kwame, if you permit me, I might be going to do my presentation so that we can have time to react to the presentation if possible.
Okay, but I think if there are no other news items from around the continent, then I think it's in order that Brother P's question is briefly examined, because he's asked a very important question, which I think all of us here are interested in, which is the situation in Gaza and the fact that South Africa has taken Israel, the government of Israel, to the ICJ. So I think it's worth us addressing that, because Gaza and Israel are on the African continent. That's what people sometimes don't understand. Gaza is on the African continent, so is Israel. People call it the Middle East, but the term Middle East was used by explorers, and today we are dealing with discovery and exploration, by explorers who were going to the Far East. So if you are in England and so on, you are going to the Far East meaning China, Japan, and so on. Then when you get to the Northern Africa, then that becomes the Middle East. It's a middle between where you are and your destination. And so that is what the Middle East is. But in actual fact, for us as Africans, there is no such thing as the Middle East.
Yes, correct.
Libya is on the African soil. All the Northern African countries are on the African continent, as is Israel and as is Gaza. So what is happening in Gaza is of importance to us as Africans, because it's happening on our soil.
Right.
You see, so I just want to clarify that. Now, this is my personal view, by the way, and that I belong to because I am a teacher. I teach mathematics in the secondary school. And in England, I am a member of the biggest trade union, education union, called the National Education Union. And this union has issued two statements for the cessation for the ceasefire. For the ceasefire. Our government, the government of the United Kingdom, has failed to do so. But we have, and our position is very clear. We want Israel to stop bombing, Gaza, so that humanitarian aid and so on can come in. And so as a union, that is our position. We think Israel is wrong to be killing women and children. And for us as teachers, remember, we teach children. So for us, killing children is for us unacceptable, because some of the children who are being killed are of the age of children that we teach. So we can just imagine coming to school one day and half of our children have been killed.
It's not there. Yeah.
Yes, we are very concerned. We are very worried. So in that sense, South Africa taking Israel
a bold step.
The ICJ is for us in order. And here I'm not speaking for the union. I'm just making my own personal position, and that is that as the president of a district of the union, I wholly, as a personal position, support what South Africa has done. And I think South Africa is very brave to do that. Whatever its problems at home, you can't say that because you have problems in your house. When you hear a man beating his wife next door, you will just bury your head in the sand and say, well, my children are also hungry. Well, I also have problems in my house.
True,
so let the man kill his wife. It doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Just because you have problems does not mean that if your next door neighbor is trying to kill his children or kill his spouse, you should just be quiet and say, well, I have problems at home, therefore I can't get involved. If you can help, you should help. So in that sense, the action of South Africa in taking Israel to court, is in order. I mean, personally, I want the state of Israel to be dismantled. I think
me too.
It's an apartheid state, and we cannot have an apartheid state on African soil. In the same way as we all were against the apartheid state of South Africa. We can't have a state that says that it is set up principally to discriminate against one group of people. That's unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. It's out of order. And although that is not the case before the court, but anyway, that's my
personal take on it. Okay, great. Thanks for that. I'd love to hear what other people have to say on that.
That is up to the chair, because he's
sorry, yeah. If we have time and if applicable, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Let me hear some Motal from South Africa.
Good evening, all. And I think I take all the inputs made by our brother Kwame. I think basically everyone and everybody see the situation that South Africa took as correct. But I think for some of us, and this is the perspective I want to bring in, there's been a lot of genocidal activities in Africa, and I think the major issue we will talk about is the Democratic Republic of Congo, where genocide has been going on, especially in the eastern part of the DRC. And it for us in South Africa, and for us, the Pan-African Congress of Azania, who are actually the opposition against the African National Congress, which is leading South Africa. Our National Assembly, through the emotion moved by the EFF, which is an opposition party also in parliament, raised a motion that said the Israeli embassy in South Africa must be shut down and closed. This was done with the African National Congress there. They never came up with such a motion. And this motion was deliberated in parliament, and it was adopted by a majority of all political parties, majority of the opposition parties participating in the African National Congress. So we are saying the government, after that motion was passed in parliament, the ruling party said, the executive said they will still have to decide on this. And instead of coming with that decision, they took this direction of the International Court of Justice. All of us know the case has been presented in the ICJ. We know that they will come, the only resolution that will come out of that is to say, let's go and send a team that is going to go on the ground, investigate all these allegations. They've already said everybody that can deposit any evidence, they must start doing that. But they will not take any decision. Such cases will take years. So we see this as a ploy by the African National Congress to show the world. Remember, they refused to declare the same thing against Russian invasion of Kuwait. I mean, of what is this, Ukraine. South Africa never wanted to take that decision when it came to Ukraine. Now, what pushes South Africa to take such a step when it comes to Palestine? And this is not nullifying the fact that we share the whole trenches with Palestine when we during our struggle. That is true. And that does not take away the fact that South Africa has been supporting the struggle of the Palestinians ever since. But to take such a strategic stance, we think they were just taking a ploy of not taking the decision to close the embassy of Israel in South Africa. And they know this will give them time in the election to say, you see, we are brave, we are able to stand against a power like Israel and America. But remember, just a few months ago when BRICS was here, America has been threatening South Africa to be moved out of what is called the economic AGOA, where South Africa can, and most African countries can send goods to America free of tax. So South Africa could not be brave now because they were threatened by that, could not be brave to challenge America and Israel. So we think they know it will take time before any decision comes out of the Court of Justice. So this is just a perspective I want members here to have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I think if there's any other reaction to that, we can take one before we proceed to now the presentation.
Maybe myself. I don't know.
Kama?
Yep.
Yes, you have something to say?
I'm just wondering, what is it that is Pan-African on South Africa, taking Israel to the international court? Where is Palestine? They're affected. And then what we should remember is that there is a history that the two warring parties, that they have. So, we need also to talk in the context of the history that they have, because each one of them claims this is mine, I don't just understand why we should waste money as Africans taking Israel to court than fight our own challenges in Africa that we have, like in Congo DRC. I don't know. I don't understand anyway.
Okay. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
Very quick. Very quick.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, it's good we hear thanks for the perspective of the man that spoke from South Africa, that maybe we cannot yet celebrate the braveness of South Africa in taking the courts, in taking the case to the courts. But whichever, in any way, it is still a commendable effort from any angle we want to look at it. We thank for that attention. We also look at whether it is braveness or just a showmanship that they can use to campaign later. We are talking of one humanity, and there should be somebody to stand up for Palestine. And I think that is what South Africa is doing beautifully well now. We should commend that. And for the man that says, what is our business spending money on this case, I think we should look more into that. Like I say, it's a common humanity for all us human beings. What genocide move that Israel is taken out in the Palestine should be condemned and should be worked against for every penny that we can spend on that. Now, I'm surprised that we are talking about the case in the South African case against Israel, but we want to brush aside the convention that was cancelled in Ghana. I don't think that is proper. We should as much say a little about it, because the four speakers that were billed for that convention were the voices that Pan-Africans were looking up to. And I must come. And for me, even if that convention was a ruse, for the fact that those four people were put together in a convention is commendable. For whatever reason, Nana Biako is putting them together is another thing. But for even having the four together in a convention is just perfect. No one is left out, and no additional person to spoil that selection is a commendable one. And for whatever reason, and for the fact that that convention sent so much duty down the spine of Ghanaian government, so much so that the Belgian PR person for this movement was initially arrested and deported, and now the convention itself was not allowed to hold, is something we should look at. Pan-Africanism, I think, is us asking for alternative narratives to African stories. And what we're seeing is an alternative. For them to have cancelled that convention, we need to look into it. We need to pay attention to it. We need not to be drifted by other campaign of calumny that is being raised against that convention. That young man is a Ghanaian, and if he has political ambition to become the governor of president of Ghana, why not? And if he's coming from Britain and is using some certain side of a marketing or campaign gimmicks of putting up masks in the first place and all those ones, and he wants to unveil himself, why not we see it? So after all, when Buhari wants to take over Nigeria in 2015, American lobbyists was employed. The same lobbyists that worked for Obama came to Nigeria, put up all fun of shows to launder the battered image of Buhari, and some of us fell for it. So what's wrong in somebody also putting up a campaign strategy in Ghana to commend this presidential campaign? Please, we need to look into that. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Brother Coco, you'll be last.
Sorry, before Brother Coco, Brother Pigeon, I think Brother Cornell's hand was up, although he didn't use the hands up.
I didn't see it. Yeah. I didn't see it.
Yeah. So Brother Cornell's hand was up before Brother Coco.
Yeah. Colonel, welcome, Colonel.
Yes.
Colonel from Zambia?
No, I'm from England.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah, I'm taking a step back. So, sorry. What I wanted to say was, as a people, we've been through a great deal, and we're very sympathetic to injustice, but in terms of getting together and doing anything, we're more sympathetic to everybody else's injustice than we are to what's happening to us. So, for example, what's happening in the Sudan, no one took a stance from Africa as a nation towards, or even our own problems are not as, we don't pay as much attention to it. It's pretty much the same thing as what the previous speaker was saying. And I think, I'm not saying that we should become immune to other people's suffering, but while we were going through our suffering, how many bodies or collectives got together and said, we need to stop this? You understand what I'm saying? So not to say that we should ignore what's going on with other people, especially when it's so close to the African continent, but we're not looking at it on that point of view. We're looking at it from the point of view of a humanitarian. I mean, most of our leaders who have been working on our behalf, we need to move on to both materialism and economics, rather than just, we're human beings. Well, I know I'm a human being. I don't need anyone to legislate that I am or prove that I am. And I'm free enough to express myself, not necessarily very loudly, but yeah, we need to, materialism and economics. That's where I'm coming from, yeah.
Thank you. Brother Coco?
Thank you. Good evening, brothers and sisters. I am calling from England at the moment. And I would like to recognize the presence of our brother from PAC. I am originally from Lesotho, Datemotau. Thank you for
Sorry, brother, not hearing you very clearly. We're not hearing you very clearly at all.
Is that better?
Much better,
Yeah.
thank you. That's beautiful, thank you.
All right. I was saying, first of all, I am pleased to have Mr. Mutau in our midst today. Pigbin Mutau is Tau is a lion, so he's from the lion clan, Mr. Mutau. So I can see you are struggling with pronouncing that. It's amazing what is happening in the world, how much they talk about democracy. Democracy doesn't exist. I always say that, but I think Brother Kwame will disagree with that. You see now that the Houthi have started attacking the ships. Britain and the States have come in, have scrambled their forces, and have done something about it. Before that, no one was doing anything about it. They were like babying and smooth talking Israel. Israel stop, or Israel has a right to defend itself. It's gross compared to what has happened in Israel. And I think to answer the question from my comrade from Zimbabwe, true, we are having issues in Africa, and we need to solve issues in Africa. We need to. It's high time we do that, but we do not have to wait until a crisis has happened somewhere else in another country, which we have been together with. We have seen the struggle in that country for a while, because in Pan-Africanism, we believe there's only one human race, and that is a problem. We have one human race, and we should not try to delineate. The minute we stand aside and fold our hands, that will happen. That Demutau knows that. If a neighbor's house burns, it's right for you to come in and help. And as Brother Christian Kwame has said, if your neighbor is beating his wife, you go investigate, you go intervene, and don't say, no, it's nothing to do with me. It is everything to do with us. We were helped in South Africa by the Cubans. We were helped by all the other countries outside of Africa to liberate South Africa. We all came together and did that as a unit. And this is an opportunity again to say, no, this should not happen. If we let this happen, again, it is going to come back to us and bite us.
Correct.
When we start our own fight, the imperialists are going to come up with some other machinations that they use, because they have all kinds of mannerism, all kinds of evil strategy that they do. And everyone else will say, it's nothing to do with us. Is that what we want? Do we want to be in that position? No, I don't think we do. But what we have to do as Africans, we have to deal with our trauma. We haven't been able to deal with our trauma sufficiently. We are divided. There are so many groups everywhere. Everyone is doing their own things. And as I say, my brother, Mr. Mutau, I think PAC has to have much more ground than it has had. It has sort of taken a backseat. Right now, we are in a technology world where we need to see PAC that was of the Subugwe, all right, of the Lebal, who I know from Lesotho. Lots of things. We need to come up as a united force as Africans. We need to bring those progressive Africans to the fore. We need all hands on deck. That is what is the problem right now. And we are not doing that. We are sort of giving up to every kind of violence which is meted up against us. That's why what has happened in Ghana is something which we should be standing up right now, everywhere around Africa, to say, no, this should not happen. But we are going to go back and say, okay, they have more power. We have power. It's our power. We are the people. Are we not the people? Is Africa not our Africa? Is it Africa for those who have guns or who live in the West, who are investing and exploiting Africa? No, Africa is our Africa. The land is ours. The materials are ours. That's why we are doing this conscientism.
Yeah, I concur, brother. I concur.
Thank you for that.
Chair, yeah, I'm wondering, since we are now 1 hour into the session, acknowledging Brother Connell's point, because we are a materialist philosophical grouping, and noting his call on us to look at materialism and economics, well noted, and then noting what all have said on this issue, and noting our members here or our visitors here who have showed concern on what's happening in Ghana. If we want to go into the Ghana matter, that will take further time. So I would suggest that I then chair the rest so that you can do the presentation, and then we have that discussion after your presentation. So if it's okay with everyone, let's let Brother Pigeon. It's 7:55 GMT now. Can we let Brother Pigeon then do his presentation on the doctrine of discovery? Brother Pigeon, how long will you need?
It will take me up to 45 minutes, the maximum or minimum.
Okay, if you do 45 minutes, that will mean we'll have about only 15 minutes of discussion time. Are you happy with that?
Yes, my suggestion is that my suggestion is that because we discuss, of course, materialism position in our Thursday, permit me to propose, if possible, we can push that the same materialist position to be shared as a tool for unification on the next Saturday, so that we can share all the angles on the next Saturday.
Sorry, I didn't get that. You want us to do what? Sorry?
I'm proposing that we actually share the same materialist position that we own, and further this discussion today on our next Saturday, so that it be an open discussion for unification in regards to material angle.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Then perhaps we can come back to because this matter is still in the ICJ. The Ghana matter has happened. Somebody has mentioned the Sudan issue. It's true, we haven't dealt with it. We in our class looked at the philosophical angle, but that is true. It's not something that has been taken up. There is murder. There is genocide in DRC Congo. There is genocide in Cameroon, and so on. So I think if it's okay, we can take this up as a discussion next week, as you've suggested, from the materialist angle, with respect to our unification, our liberation, and our total development. So yes, so let's proceed with your presentation today on the this doctrine of discovery, and then let's have that discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. On the doctrines of discovery, this order that was given in 1452 is the order that's being applied today indirectly, on when, of course, Israel is invading our country, destroying it, searching out, capturing it, subduing it, and making those people, converting them to their property. So permit me start this conversation today by quoting what is in the screen here on the Pope Nicholas V Papal Bull doctrine of discovery that was done in 1452. It quotes by saying, go out there, of course, invade, search out, capture them. So invading was to invade, of course, us, search out our property, capture us, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans, whatever, and other enemies of Christ whatsoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movables and immovables goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, which of course we Africans also suffer that perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to yourself his successions, these kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominion, possessions, and goods. And that's what they did to Africa. They actually possessed our properties, scrambled our property, divided Africa, and make them their properties, and then convert them to your use and profit. And that's what they did to us. They converted us either into Christianity or any other form for their use and their profit. So that will be my opening starter for this conversation. Permit me to then share my slide that I'll be doing shortly, so that we can move on. Now,
what happened to your headphone?
My headphone has issues.
Okay.
emphasis on propaganda, on an information war to manufacture consent.
No, sorry for that. I don't know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Yes.
I'll try to expand it further.
Yeah, no, if you could put it in presentation mode so we don't see your menu and your preview slides.
I don't know where would that be, but
In the view.
or in the view.
Yeah, check view. You should have present mode or something like that over there.
Okay. Okay, I'm not able to see that, but I'm seeing slides and the rest.
Okay, what's the package? Is that PowerPoint or is it a different package?
Is that PowerPoint?
It is PowerPoint. Yeah,
I go to slideshow. Where it says slideshow?
Slideshow.
Oh,
That's it.
Can you see slideshow? Is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a 7th menu from the left. That is your right.
4, 5, 6,
Can you see slideshow on top?
The top menu. The top menu.
Slideshow. Click slideshow.
Yeah, you see it? Yeah, there you
No.
And then
That's
expand.
okay.
And then expand the expand it.
Okay, it's not able to show me.
So-
Let me just proceed.
Brother Piggy,
show.
Go to the
Piggy,
bottom
you
of
can
the screen.
Send me the slides. I can also share them for you.
No,
Then
go
you-
to the bottom of the screen under where you have comments. After comments, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. Where you have that with the slideshow, you just want to click on that.
There you
Nope.
go.
Now
then
it's
you should
okay?
just- yeah, you should just be able to press the space bar and it will flick through the slides.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
you
So,
see? Yeah.
So if you can hear me, permit me to proceed.
Yeah, we can hear you.
The doctrine of discovery, of course, as it is a complex and controversial set of legal principles that originated in the 15th century during the age of exploration. And this is breakdown. It was issued by the European popes, as I've said, Alexander V, between 1452 and 1493. The doctrine granted Christian monarchs exclusive rights to explore, claim, exploit land outside of Europe that were not inhabited by Christians. Its primary purpose was to legitimize European colonization and expansion, particularly in the Americas and other parts of course, Caribbean and Africa, by justifying the dispossession of indigenous peoples from their land and resources. The key tenets of this discovery include the terras nullas or terras nullas. I think that's a Latin word. This concept meant that land not inhabited by Christians were considered no man land, which means even lands that were inhabited by us Africans were considered no man's land because we were not Christian by then and could be claimed by Christian sovereigns. This ignored and dismissed the existing indigenous ownership and governance structure. Their second tenet was the right of discovery. They claimed that discovery by a Christian power established a sovereignty over the discovered territory, giving them the right to control and exploit its territory and its people. That's why they could come to Africa and say, we have discovered Lake What, we have discovered which country, we have discovered America and the rest. There was the Papal Grant. The Papal Grant is the popes, as head of the Catholic Church, claim the authority to grant these rights to Christian monarchs, further bolstering their claims to a newly discovered land. Its impact, of course, is extensive. The doctrine of discovery had a devastating consequence for indigenous people worldwide, leading to disposition of land, our resources, and our cultural practices. Now, let's move to key questions that I'll be handling directly because time is not on our side. The key questions I'll have to handle directly today in this presentation will include the historical context, the legal context, and other contexts that will be coming later. But the historical context will include how did the doctrine emerge within the context of European exploration and its rivalry in the 15th and 16th century? How did specific interpretation of Christians and papal authority contributed to the formation of the doctrine? And how did this legal framework interact with other emerging international laws and colonial practices? The legal aspect will be checking which specific legal arguments have been used to challenge the doctrine in domestic and international laws, and what are some of the key courts ruling related to this. We'll also check on its impact on the communities. An additional aspect will be the application of doctrines beyond American exploration. And our first question will be on how did the doctrine, of course, emerge? I'm not finding this making sense to me because my screen, let me check. Okay, there was a competition and conflict. During the age of exploration, we know that it was fueled by intense competition among European powers like Portugal, Spain, and England, who are vying to access trade routes, resources, and territories. This led to disputes and desperate need for legal framework to legitimize their claim to newly discovered land. There was a religious justification. The Catholic Church wielded immense authority during this period, so the Pope saw European expansion as an opportunity to spread Christianity and claimed that divine right to grant Christians monarch exclusive rights to explore and claim non-Christian land. This provided religious justification for colonial activities and solidified the concept of terras nullius, which deemed that no man's land if it is not inhabited by Christians. There was an economic incentives. The pursuit of wealth and resources played a major role. Of course, the discovery of new lands fueled hopes of acquiring gold, spices, and valuable commodities. And then there was evolving legal landscape, which included medieval legal laws, which were inadequate for the expansive ambition for European powers. So the doctrine offered a convenient legal tool to justify overseas claims of these such territories. There was also what I said, the papal bulls and the political maneuvering. And alongside that, it's very important to note that the doctrine primarily targeted inhabited or non-Christian land. So if you know that, it means almost all Africa, and all Africa was actually targeted, conveniently ignoring existing indigenous population and their governance structure. They totally ignored that. They laid the groundwork for dispossession and exploitation of indigenous resources. You must also be aware that the historical context cannot be divorced from the racist and Eurocentric ideologies that fuel European expansion. The doctrine served as a powerful tool for asserting European dominance and justifying the subjugation of non-European populations or people. Now, how did this specific interpretation of Christianity and papal authority contribute to the formation of the doctrine? Now, we will be seeing such justifications that were given forth, which include dominion mandate. We know very well that the European Christians interpreted the Bible or the biblical passage in the Genesis, where God granted humanity dominion over the earth as a divine mandate for expansion and colonization. This justified their claim to territories already inhabited by indigenous people. There was also just war theory, and there was also salvation and conversion. Of course, some of them believed that converting indigenous people was a spiritual duty, and the doctrine offered a legal framework for establishing that mission and exerting control over the newly discovered lands to facilitate their conversion effort. The papal authority and land grants, as I've said, the no man's land, the papal bulls, which is the documents like the 1493 bull Inter Satera by Pope Alexander VI. So there were many papal bulls. The papal bulls were like those documents given. So each documentation or each gazettement or each legal document was called papal bull. So there were the papal bull of 52, there's papal bull of 49. And then there was also spiritual superiority. The Pope, as I've said, as he was the head of a cause of the religion, felt that the authority was granted to claim these lands' rights and exert influence over non-Christians. There was internal debates and criticism also, which is also important to check on all interpretation of Christianity and the papal endorsed doctrine. Of course, there are some theologians like Francisco de Victoria who critiqued it as unjust to an indigenous people. So these are some of the things that are also debating the churches and people who actually opposed this. But how did this legal framework interact with other emerging international laws and colonial practices? In the initial compatibility, we realize that in the early stages of European colonization, the doctrine fit well with the existing legal framework of just war. Some people will call it a holy war, which allowed for the conquest of non-Christian territories. This provided a moral and legal veneer for Europeans claims based on religious superiority. Additionally, the doctrine complemented emerging nations of terras nullius. Somebody's trying to interfere with my screen, but
sorry, brother. Sorry, it's me. Sorry about that.
No, I can proceed offline.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Do I have to reshare it, or should I just proceed offline?
Yeah, can you reshare it? Reshare it from where you.
Okay, so let me reshare it then from this where it's possible for me to do that. So I'm no longer host. Let me check if I can be.
Yeah, it's all right. It's fine. I'm making you host now.
Or even co-host.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. So sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, carry on.
So let me proceed with a version that is very easy for me to read through. The other one is bringing serious issues for me. So let me proceed to where I was, which was on the third question.
The current one on the screen, even I can read it now. I couldn't read the previous one.
Yeah, so
I don't know if other people could read what was on the screen, but I couldn't.
So I was talking of the initial compatibility. That was the justification. Now the next thing was the emergent stations. So as European empires expanded and competed for territory, the doctrine exclusively began to create conflicts. There was the race for discovery, led to disputes and even war between European powers over what had first been claimed to be specific territories. So you can remember some of those wars where these territories or these former European powers were competing for territories. Treaties like the Treaty of Tordesillas of 1494 attempted to divide newly discovered land between Spain and Portugal, but this argument often failed to account for indigenous population or the reality of existing indigenous parties. There was also a shifting landscape. The rise of Enlightenment ideas or ideals within the 18th century that challenged the religious and moral basis for the doctrine, leading to call for more humane treatment of indigenous population. The international law also gradually evolved to incorporate principle of self-determination, sovereignty, further undermining the doctrine of legitimacy. However, these new legal frameworks were often inconsistently applied and used to justify the continued colonial control in practice. There was persistence and legacy. Despite of its growing incompatibility with emerging laws or norms, the doctrine of discovery continued to be invoked by colonial powers throughout the 19th and the early 20th century, particularly justifying the disposition of indigenous lands, of course, in America and in Australasia. The doctrine legacy continued also to haunt legal systems and land ownership disputes in many former colonial territories, with some countries who have formally renounced the doctrine. Its underlying principle of terras nullius on the right of discovery still influence legal arguments and court rulings. There were also examples of interactions. If you check in the United States, the Supreme Court in 1823 decision, which was between Johnson and M. Intosh, relied on the doctrine to justify that the federal government claimed to extinguish Native American lands' rights. These legal precedents continue to be challenged by indigenous community. There was also a case in Australia where the Mabo case of 1992 marked a turning point in recognizing indigenous land rights, but the doctrine legacy remains a contested issue in the land ownership disputes and reconciliation efforts. There was also other challenges in several courts, but there was incompatibility also. Apart from compatibility with the legal laws that gave it rights or international law, there was incompatibility. In human rights angle, the doctrine was seen and is seen as a violation for fundamental human rights of indigenous people, particularly the rights for self-determination, land ownership, and cultural practices. These arguments, of course, draws to the instrument like in the UN Declaration of Human Rights of Indigenous People, you see. There is also aspect of non-discrimination. The doctrine's discriminatory basis was favoring Christian powers over non-Christian people. It's argued to actually contravene international principles prohibiting racial discrimination and equal treatment under the law. Because by saying that lands that were not occupied by non-Christians was to be considered as no man's land, that was totally discriminatory. There's also invalidity of the papal authority, which actually you have ultra vires or varas. This argument claims that the Pope exceeded his authority by granting land rights to secular monarchs. It questions whether the Pope had any legal basis to claim sovereignty over territories and dispose of them without recognizing existing inhabitants. There was temporal power, which some argue that the Pope's authority was limited to spiritual matter and did not extend to granting worldly possessions like land. This challenges the historical context and interpretation of papal power used to justify the doctrine. Of course, as we say, terras nullas, which is some consider it as a fiction. Pre-existing occupants, this argument emphasizes that indigenous people had a long-standing and established relationship with their land and governance structures before Europeans' contacts. Therefore, terras nullas is challenged as a legal construct that ignored the pre-existing realities and indigenous sovereignty. We Africans, of course, in possession of our land, we had our relationship with our land and our governance structures. And therefore, claiming that any land, especially African land that was not occupied by Christians, was to be no man's land, it meant that we Africans were no man to them or no man to them. There's also continuous occupation, which even when indigenous population face displacement or dissemination, evidence of their ongoing cultural practices and connection to their land is presented to challenge the notion of abandonment or used to justify European claim. There have been so many domestic constitutional challenges, which is actually have the inconsistency with these treaties and agreements. In some cases, for example, where treaties were recognized indigenous rights of land ownership, the doctrine is argued to be inconsistent with those arguments and thus invalid with the domestic legal frameworks. There was violation of constitutional principles. In some countries, the doctrine discriminatory nature is challenged as violating constitutional principles of equality and non-discrimination, particularly in cases involving indigenous citizens. I see some hand is up. Chair, do you have to maybe react to that? Or should I proceed?
Sorry, whose hand is up? I can't see any hand up.
A Jete hand was up, or was it by mistake?
No, it's
Yeah,
not
because I raised my hand because we can. Your voice is very we can't hear you properly. You know, we can hardly hear you.
Okay,
Comrade,
so if you can raise your voice slightly.
Yeah, it's not very clear, Pigman. It's like before. It's not.
We're struggling to follow you.
Yeah, sorry. Can we allow him to then continue? Your point is made.
So you can hear me now.
Go on. Let's see if we hear you.
We can hear you, but it's not very clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Permit me then to proceed. Am I audible?
Yeah. This sounds better.
Much better. Much better.
Violation of indigenous sovereignty.
Good.
Argument assert that the pre-existing indigenous governance structures and ownership of land should have been recognized regardless of Christian presence. It emphasizes the inherent right of indigenous people to self-determination and control over their territories. The example, as I've said, the case on the Mabo and Queensland of the Republic of Australia. There was also incompatibility within international laws. Those are also what I've mentioned, the cases like the UN and other cases. So let's check also, there was also procedural flaws. For example, challenges sometimes focus on the questionable legal basis and procedures used in applying the doctrine, arguing that it was never properly incorporated into national legal system or that its application was arbitrary and discriminatory. There was a case between Robinson versus the state of South Australia. There was also equitable arguments. Some cases appeal to the notion of fairness and justice, arguing that the historical injustice inflicted through the doctrine and subsequent dispensation or dispossession required redress and restoration of indigenous rights. There's a case there between Wiparara versus the Republic of Chile. Now, what are the key court rulings related to challenging this doctrine and what impact have they had? For example, we had a case in the United States of America, which I had mentioned before, between Johnson and McIntosh in 1823. This landmark Supreme Court case upheld the doctrine of discovery, stating that Christian discovery gave the United States title to land not occupied by Christians, effectively dispossessing indigenous people. This decision had a profound impact on indigenous land rights in the USA, setting a precedence for subsequent treaties and legal battles. There was also a legal case between the Cherokee Nation and the Georgia in 1831, where the Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a domestic dependent nation with limited sovereignty, further weakening its claim to land and reinforcing the doctrine's application. Other cases include, of course, the Worcester and Georgia case in 1832, where it was established that the principle that indigenous nations have some degree of sovereignty within their territories, chipping away at the absolute power granted by the doctrines. Now, there are so many cases, including the Duro-Reina cases in 1990, there's the Gobert case in 2009. This case addressed the mismanagement of billions of dollars in trust fund owned to indigenous community by the United States of America. While not directly related to the doctrine, it highlighted the ongoing legacy of historical injustice and challenges indigenous peoples face in reclaiming their resources. In Canada, there were also other cases, which this one was between the Chilokit, nation versus British Columbia. This landmark Supreme Court ruling recognized that that community or that nation aboriginal title to a specific territory in British Columbia based on their traditional use and occupation of the land. While not explicitly rejecting the doctrine, it challenged its application and affirmed the importance of considering indigenous land rights based on traditional practices. There's also a New Zealand case and another cases. At international courts, there are those cases that are coming from New Zealand, but there has also been adversarial opinion on the Western Sahara. The International Court of Justice declared the doctrine to be contrary to general international law and incompatible with the right of self-determination of indigenous people. Now, its impact of this doctrine has included, of course, erosion of legal basis. The ruling have weakened the legal legitimacy of the doctrine, providing legal argument for indigenous community to challenge its possession and assert their land right. It has also given recognition of indigenous rights. Some rulings have explicitly recognized indigenous rights, land rights, and sovereignty, even in countries where doctrine was previously influential. It has also increased legal challenges. By those cases that have been pronounced in courts have increased legal challenges, and with these actually embodied indigenous community to pursue legal action against governments and corporations based on their doctrine and historical justices. There have been also now ongoing debates based on this doctrine. But the next question should be, can you give, of course, I want to give specific examples of how this doctrine has been used to dispossess land of indigenous community. And I'll give example in Africa. Now, in land dispossession, as I've said, there's that case of Johnson, where the court declared the Native American tribes as domestic dependent nation without sovereignty over their land. They were domestic dependent. That term was used, and this paved the way for forceful removal. Their land was grabbed by settlers and the federal government. And this actually may lead to establishment of reservations, of course, reserves. Even in Kenya, there are so many reserves that they had. In Australia, the same thing, actually also leading to what you call finally overturning the doctrine in Australia, but its legacy remains. Indigenous land claims are often rejected based on the idea that they were terras nullas before British arrival, leading to ongoing land ownership issues. There's also the aspect of not only land dispossession, but our resources were also exploited of those countries where these territories were acquired through this doctrine. And the doctrine influence on Canadian law facilitated the disposition of indigenous land rich in natural resources like timber, mineral, and the rest. In Latin America, it was also used to justify the exploitation of indigenous communities' resources like gold, silver, rubber in countries like Brazil. In Africa, in colonial Africa, of course, the doctrine was also used to claim the vast territories for European powers. You remember the whole Africa was almost partitioned in Europeans, and they were given rights actually to claim our resources from our gold and everything else. They also actually eroded cultural practices. For example, you check in the United States, the doctrine was used to justify the forced assimilation policies. You remember their purpose was to actually convert and use them as per the order. So they actually took us from our traditional practices to convert us either or assimilate us to their, of course, Christianity and any other thing that came along with that. These actually some of measures included, like even in Kenya, the banning of traditional languages, ceremonies, and spiritual practices that were aimed to eradicate actually indigenous cultural identities. The same happened in Ghana, in Canada, where residential schools were established under the doctrine influence, aimed to assimilate indigenous children into European culture by severing them from their families, languages, and tradition. In Australia, the same thing was used, where there's the stolen generation policy of forced removal of indigenous children from their families. In African context of check on the land dispossession, we say that the doctrine was of course invoked by the British Crown to claim vast swaths of land from indigenous Xhosa and Zulu communities, displacing them and establishing shelter or settler colonies. This process, of course known as the Land Act of 1913, severely restricted indigenous land ownership and laid the foundation for the apartheid regime. In Kenya, the British used the same doctrine actually to create in their protectorate in East Africa, actually in Kenya, dispossessing the Maasai pastoralist land, and also even if you check in the what they were calling White Islands, which was our land in the central part of Kenya, they were also actually, their land was taken away. And you know, the Maasai community are pastoralists, so where they were grazing their animals were also taken away. And this contributed actually to marginalization and impoverishment of this indigenous community. In Namibia, the German Empire employed the doctrine to claim Namibia, the then German Southwest Africa, and displaced the Nama and Herero people from their ancestral land. Of course, we know this led to a conflict, and the Herero and Namako genocide, a dark chapter in African history. The resources were also exploited. If you check in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Belgian King Leopold used the doctrine to establish Congo Free State, a brutal regime that exploited the country's rubber sources and forced indigenous Congolese into forced labor. This period of exploitation of war resulted into immense suffering and death for millions of the people. In Liberia, the American Colonization Society, citing the doctrine, established Liberia as a homeland for freed slaves. However, this process often involved displacing indigenous communities from their ancestral land and imposing a foreign system of governance. In cultural suppression, we check in Tanzania, for example, where the British colonial authorities used the doctrine to justify the imposition of Christian belief and practices on indigenous community, often leading to the suppression of their traditional religious activities and cultural expression. In Nigeria, the British, of course, government also used the doctrine to undermine traditional Igbo political structures and impose a centralized administration, leading to cultural assimilation and erosion of indigenous governance system. Those are just few examples that we'll have to check on, but there are so many. Actually, it was very clear that the doctrine plays a significant role in dispossessing indigenous people, their land, their resources, and their cultural practices, contributing to marginalization and the ongoing struggle for justice. Let's check on some of the long-term social, cultural, and economic consequences of this doctrine. In social aspect, there has been what we call dispossession and displacement. The doctrine legitimized the confiscation of indigenous land and resources, forcing community into smaller, often marginalized territories. This severing of ancestral ties and connection to land has led to cultural disorientation, loss of traditional practices, and a deep sense of alienation. There's intergenerational trauma. The trauma of dispossession and violence continued to be passed down through generations, impacting mental health, family structures, and community cohesion. Loss of identity and cultural practices and traditional knowledge contributed to a sense of powerlessness and despair. There was discrimination and marginalization. Indigenous communities often face systematic discrimination in areas like in education, employment, and healthcare. This ongoing marginalization further limits opportunity and perpetuates cycle of poverty and disadvantage. There's loss of languages and traditional knowledge. The disruption of traditional ways of life and the forced adoption of dominant language has led to the decline and even extinction of many indigenous languages. This loss of knowledge system and cultural practices weaken the community identity and resilience. In the economic angle, it has led to poverty and economic deprivation. The loss of land and resources has severely crippled the economic base of many indigenous communities, limiting access to land and resources coupled with discriminatory policies leaves community trapped in circle of poverty, as I've said, and actually on dependence on external aids, as Africa is depending on external aids. There's exploitation of our resources. As I've said, there are so many resources that have been exploited. And these actually include very valuable and natural resources, attracting extractive industries that exploit these resources without fair compensation. Up to date, those companies are still doing the same in Africa. This further exacerbates, of course, economic inequalities and environmental degradation that they are not even paid for up to date. There's lots of our traditional livelihood. The doctrine disrupted traditional hunting, fishing, or agricultural practices, forcing many indigenous communities to adapt unsuitable and often exploitative wage labor in the dominant economy. This loss of self-sufficiency and control over resources further weakens economic stability. For example, in Kenya, when they displaced the community of the Kikuyu community from their land, the Kikuyu community were then converted to be workers of their land in the land that now processed by the white man. So when they had their land that they could use to make money out of it or make wealth out of it, they were converted now to be servants of their own land, but to serve now a white man in their own land. There's also on cultural aspects, as I've said, we've lost our identities and our practices. We've also lost our spirituality and religious disconnection. The severance from ancestral land and the disruption of our traditional ceremonies and rituals weakens the spiritual connection of indigenous community to their land and their ancestors. That's what it has done to us. It has weakened our connection, spiritual connection of our land and our ancestors. This spiritual disconnection can lead to a sense of emptiness and sometimes loss of meaning. This intergenerational loss of knowledge that I've also said. So, however, the lasting legacy of this doctrine continues to shape the lives of indigenous people around the world, highlighting these urgent needs, highlighting the urgent need for reconciliation, recognition, and justice. Now, what role was played by indigenous or religious institutions in upholding and sometimes contesting this doctrine? Now, this brings us to what we call the 12 phase of faith, the religious institutions and the doctrine of discovery. Those who upheld this doctrine, which is the papal authority, the doctrine which derived, of course, its legacy, as I've said, from the Alexander Pope V in 1452, and this 1459. One of the people who have been trying to uphold this were the religious justification, as I've said, that deemed the unclaimed land as no man's land, was bolstered by religious interpretation and stewardship and dominion over the earth. This frame cast European expansion as divinely sanctioned mission to convert and civilize Hathen population. To them, they felt that what they were doing to us was a divine mission. There was also missionary activity. A religious institution often partnered with colonial powers, with the missionaries playing a crucial role in pacifying and assimilating indigenous communities. This collaboration further legitimized the doctrine and facilitated the appropriation of land and resources. Those who contested the doctrine, there's the humanitarian concern. Of course, within the church itself, voices emerged questioning the doctrine moral implication. There are figures like Bartolome de la Casas, a Spanish priest, who witnessed the first and brutal treatment of indigenous people, condemning the doctrine's cruelty and advocated for their rights. The indigenous rights argument also. The theologians and philosophers like Francisco de Victoria challenged the legal basis of doctrine, arguing the inherent right and sovereignty of indigenous people over their land. This laid, of course, the groundwork for future debates and international law that is still going on up today. There was indigenous faith. Indigenous religious leaders and communities actively resisted the imposition of Christianity and the doctrine's justification. Their spiritual beliefs and practices often challenge the claims of European religious supremacy, offering alternatives perspectives on land, sovereignty, and justice. This legacy and this implication. The legacy of religious constitution in relation to the doctrine remain contested. While the Christian has formally renounced its claim of territorial domination, its historical involvement continued to be a point of contention for indigenous community. The ongoing struggle for indigenous rights and recognition often intersects with religious discourse, with faith-based organizations playing a role in advocating for justice and reconciliation. Examining the role of religion in both upholding and contesting these doctrines provides a valuable lens of understanding the complexity of dynamics of colonialism, power, and resistance. It also challenges us to critically examine the potential and the limitations of faith in addressing historical injustices and promoting justice for indigenous people. Now, moving forward, the complex history of religious institutions and the doctrine of discovery highlights the need for ongoing critical examinations and dialogue. Faith-based community can play, of course, a critical role in this. By reclaiming other aspects, there's also the reclamation and reinterpretation of their own tradition from an anti-colonial perspective and challenging the justification used in the past. There's also aspect of supporting indigenous community. Those faith-based organizations must now come in because they were used actually against our land. If they have to salvage themselves, they must join the struggle for land rights and cultural autonomy and spiritual revitalization. They need also to be advocating for systematic change, the policy reforms to recognize and uphold indigenous rights, dismantling the vestiges of doctrine's legacy. By engaging on all these efforts, of course, those religious communities can rewrite their histories. But the last part of this is the potential for reparations and other forms of redress for historical injustice linked to this. Of course, we know as the question of reparation has been going on for a while, but let's check the arguments for this reparation. People push for these reparations, one, on moral imperative. They claim, and of course, with the opinion that the doctrine caused immense harm to indigenous community, dispossessing them of their lands, their resources, and their cultural practices. Therefore, formal recognition and compensation for these injustices is seen as a moral imperative. The intergenerational trauma, the effect of the doctrine continue to reverberate through generations, impacting social, economic, and cultural well-being. Therefore, reparation will address these long-term consequences. The historical precedents. Similar historical injustices, like slavery, have been addressed through applying this principle of doctrines of discovery could set a precedence for broader recognition and redress. There's the potential forms of redress. There can be land restitution, which is returning stolen lands to indigenous communities, could be a powerful form of reparations, rebuilding cultural connections and providing a fundamental or foundation for economic development. Financial compensation. Monetary payment could provide a tangible resource to address economic disparities and support cultural revitalization efforts. Educational initiatives, funding indigenous communities' education programs and research could empower communities to promote their cultural knowledge and challenge the colonial narratives. The treaties and agreements, formal agreements between governments and indigenous nations could acknowledge historical injustices, establishing land rights and create frameworks for ongoing partnership and reconciliation. But there are so many challenges ahead. There's legality and recognition. The doctrines of discovery is not formally recognized in international law, making legal claims for reparation complex and uncertain. There's a political will. Government may be reluctant to acknowledge historical injustices and commit to costly reparation programs. The practicabilities and implementations, defining who is eligible for reparation, determining the scope and the scale for redress, and ensuring fair and efficient distribution are immense logistical challenges. There are legal and political hurdles. Implementing reparation faces legal challenges with questions surrounding historical accountability, quantifying damages, and overcoming potential resistance from colonial beneficiary groups. But there's also complexity and diversity of indigenous community. Addressing historical injustice requires acknowledging the diverse experience, the need for different indigenous communities across the globe, avoiding a one-size-fits-all approach. So, including logistical and practical challenges and current development initiatives, of course, we have indigenous advocacy group, we have international recognition, and then the UN Declaration on the Human Rights, on the rights of indigenous communities. We have national commissions in countries like Canada and Australia. But furthermore, we need to learn more about specific examples of these indigenous communities and whatever atrocity were done on them. We need to have to investigate the work of organizations like the International Working Group for Indigenous Affairs and the UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Community. We need also to read about historical examples of reparation programs on other historical injustices, such as, of course, US civil rights movements. And also, lastly, so when we come towards the end, because the other side is explanation. So the potential for reparation for historical injustice linked to the doctrine of discovery remains complex and contested issue. However, the growing awareness of its harmful legacy, coupled with the increased advocacy of indigenous communities, suggests that there is the conversation is shifting towards accountability and redress. While the challenges remain ongoing, efforts to explore diverse forms of reparations offer a glimmer of hope for more just and equitable society. So that will mark my end of this conversation. I have done a historical search on the examples of those Papal Bull, examples of the doctrine. These are the Papal Bull of the urban 5 of 1635. So these are the orders that were given on those aspects to come and explore. There's another one by Pope Benedict VI in 2011, which instituted the military ordinance of Bosnia and Yugoslavia. So these are also just further explanation on what's Papal Bull all about and how these documents were actually drafted. So the Papal Bull is a type of public decree or a letter or a charter that was given out for this conquest. So basically, that will mark my end of the presentation.
Thank you, Brother Fijin, for what I would say is a very, very well well researched and well documented and well detailed research on the question of the doctrine of discovery and linking it to reparations, which is a big issue, both for and against. But so I'll open the floor in a moment, but I want to make one or two comments before that to put Brother Pigeon's presentation within context. And from the point of view of economics and culture, if you like, the Pan-African movement is suffering from three things. There is a historical angle, which is that some Pan-Africanists merely or wholly focus on historical wrongs, historical achievements of the African people, and what has happened in history, and they go back to Egypt and Kemet and so on and so forth. And a lot of Pan-Africans focus on that past, and like John Rogers of the U.S. at the time, who did not believe the lies that were told about the achievement of Africans historically, and therefore who went out to look for the facts. We've had a lot of that, and that is an affirmation of the history of the African is something that is the large part of the Pan-African movement. The second part of the Pan-African movement, which that's the second aspect, is the aspect that has in a way preoccupied us in terms of the politics. And that is where I mentioned that there are three types of Pan-Africanists, politically, that is, the liberals, the conservatives, and the radical Pan-Africanists. And in that sense, it's talking about the question of current governance. So in other words, there are Africans who are not interested in the history of where we've come from, and they're not interested in any of that. What they are interested in is, what do we do now? In other words, how do we govern the current African continent? And in that governance, a lot of the Pan-African or African governments are not interested in the unification of the continent. And any who shout that, when they come into office, they forget about it. So they are primarily interested in how to govern the territory in which they are the president, whether it's Akufo-Addo of Ghana or Museveni of Uganda and so on. But to be fair to some of them, like Museveni, he is also talking about the East African region, but he's not talking about the unification of the continent as a whole. And there are brothers and sisters here who also do not believe in the continental project. They think that we should focus only on sub-Saharan Africa. Be that as it may, the point here is that there are those Pan-Africanists who are just interested in how to govern and make money today. They are not really interested in the past. The third type of Pan-Africanists are the Pan-Africanists who are saying, okay, so what do we do for the future? How do we reorganize ourselves for power, for development, for unification, for the welfare of our people tomorrow? In other words, what do we do for the future? Because the future is ahead of us. The past is gone, today is now, but what about tomorrow? Now, these types of Pan-Africanists are in a way also contending with one another. And as Brother Ekoko said, we are not united in that we have not brought together how we want to move, whether if we're going to look at the future, why don't we bring all our forces together and look at the future, and so on and so forth. So, so within that context, the presentation we've had today has dealt with all three. It has dealt with the past, what happened in the past. It has also then talked about the present, some of this are happening at present, and has drawn our attention to some of the things we could do going forward. So this, if you like, ideological context is something I am offering. So having said that, let's open the floor so that we hear from all of us in terms of what we've heard. Thank you very much. But can I also make one or 2 points? Let's remember that in terms of challenging this doctrine, the Gold Coast, which became Ghana, played a very instrumental role in around 1897. They formed an organization called the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. And this society was made up of very educated Africans. And I don't know if you know, but they traveled to England because England passed a law in around 1897 declaring our lands as no man's land and so on, and all that nonsense anyway. So they came to England, to the House of Commons here in England, and they challenged the law on the floor of the House. And as a result, the British changed the law with respect, as I understand it, to Ghana, to what was then Gold Coast and West Africa. Unfortunately, for the East Africa and Southern Africa, no such challenge was mounted on a legal basis. But I thought I should mention that the Gold Coast, now Ghana, has a long tradition of fighting such injustices. I just thought I'll mention that. Thank you. Right, the floor is open. I think brother Ifo Aikidis' hand is up. Yeah, brother Ifo, over to you.
Yes,
I hope I pronounced your name right.
it is Ifo.
Ifo. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for what you have shared. I came in late, about an hour late because of time difference. But what I got from the end is in line with my understanding of I would say international law, and more precisely the complete fraud of the colonial experiment, including the doctrine of discovery. And so I shared something in the chat about an elder who in Canada here, who was also writing similar things to what Elder Pigeon had shared, but he was speaking specifically about what was happening here in Canada and in North America, and then connecting it to the global struggle. So what I am wondering is if there are any concrete efforts to better educate those of us on the motherland or from the motherland who've been confused by colonial education into believing that we are Nigerians, Ghanaians, or whatever colonial title, as opposed to who we really are as our indigenous peoples. And I'm wondering on the ground what efforts there are to reclaim our sovereign identity and also our land. Because I hear people talking about they're Pan-Africanists, but they think that, we need to make Nigeria the leader, or some other country the leader, or they're just trying to figure out how to make the colonial boundaries better, as opposed to how to actually really decolonize and separate. That's what I'm wondering. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That is the issue to do with the liberal and conservative, and conservative Pan-Africanists, which is that they are merely interested in governing the current territories. They are not thinking ahead. And the other Pan-Africanists who are interested in the future are saying that, but if we maintain these colonial boundaries that we've inherited from 1884, from the Germans, from the German thing, that going forward, it doesn't protect our strategic security. So in terms of our strategic security as a people, we have to develop an organization through which we can both protect ourselves today and then protect ourselves tomorrow. So yeah. So now the point you have asked, the question of what we are doing, we've noted that, and we will come back to that later. Not necessarily today, but we will have contact with you, and then we can talk more. I have looked at the site that you have shared with us.
By the way, I am working on that at the moment and have been trying to educate Africans here in Canada about the reality of who we are.
Excellent. We are happy to work with you.
To connect with other people.
Yeah, we are happy to work with you. Right. Okay, so the floor is open. I'm just checking that any more hands up. Yes, Brother Cornell.
Yes.
Yes.
Hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. I can see that a lot of research have gone into this document, which was presented to us. But my thinking is, based on what I've heard, the Europeans came with a plan, and they executed that plan. It was a global plan. They executed, and they're still executing, and they've still got plans. They're moving forward. And I think that we need to think like what's happening today and what's going to happen tomorrow. And by that, I mean the winning of hearts, minds, and spirits is the new plan, because the land has already been garnered up by most of the Europeans. And so now when we recover our minds and our spirits, we will recover the land that belongs to us. That's my belief. I don't know how difficult it's going to be to execute getting the majority of our people to believe in themselves and to regain our spirits. And then after regaining the spirit, to regain our minds. And once we've got our minds back, no contest, the land will come back to us. You understand me? I've not discussed this with anybody. I'm just talking after watching this. And I've learned a lot today, in terms of contextualizing things. But that's where I'm at. I think the battle is now for the mind, especially, I don't want to throw this in, but it's the advance of the new AI movement, as in artificial intelligence and computing. The battlefield is now for the hearts, minds, and spirits as it stands. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Can I, if it's okay with everyone, make a point? Because I think what Brother Cornell is saying, and our own brother PJ, Mr. DJ, Mr. P has also made this point, which is that I want to read from Nkrumah's speech on 6 March 1957 when Ghana got independence. I won't read the whole thing. I won't just read the part where he talks about the mind. This is what he said. I read, quote unquote, "And as I pointed out, from now on, today, we must change our attitudes and our minds. We must realize that from now on, we are no longer a colonial, but free and independent people," unquote. So this is Nkrumah's speech on the 6th of March, 1957, on the Polo Grounds, when Ghana became independent, the first sub-Saharan African country, led by himself, and he made his speech. So right from there, the radical Pan-African movement of the progressives recognized the role of the mind and the fact that we have to take on the issue of the mind. Now, for our class here, the reason we are having this class is precisely because we want to start a conversation so that people can talk about it. And in talking about it, it draws their attention to the issues and therefore influence them and their spirits, their minds, and so on. So yes, Brother Cornell, spot on. And other brothers and sisters here agree with you. And that is why we hold a Thursday class. The purpose of the Thursday class is to change hearts and minds, because most Africans were brought up on idealism, by which we mean spirit, demons, unseen things, ghosts, God, the devil, the kind of spiritual things and spirituality, and we were not introduced to the other philosophy, which is materialism. And everything that the enemy has done to us has had a material impact on us. A lot of us, we can't send our children to good schools or any schools at all. Our children are not eating properly. We are not eating properly. Our rivers are polluted. Our diamonds have been stolen. Our gold is being stolen. It's just one material problem after another. So yeah, so you are spot on. Thank you very much. Yes, please. The floor is open. If anyone wants to speak, please raise your hand.
Yeah. Responding to the last question about the land.
Yes, go on.
I like to remind people that even according to colonial law, stolen property is not your property. And so all of what that they have stolen is ours. So they are illegally occupying territory. They've illegally claimed ownership of land, whether that be in Kenya or in Nigeria. And they've illegally made profits from those lands. So even according to colonial law, the proceeds from illegal activities should be returned to the people that they stole them from, even if you want to use colonial law.
Yeah, okay.
But
thank you very much.
Sometimes, we start acting as if the stuff that they stole, they didn't steal. And I think we need to be careful, because sometimes we have African governments that want to pay people for the land that they stole. And I think we need to make sure that that doesn't happen, that no African country should pay the thieves to give us back our stolen property. They should pay us. We shouldn't pay them.
Yeah,
that's how I feel.
No, thank you. You see, we've been discussing South Africa's role in taking Israel to court in the ICJ. And Brother Sam has drawn our attention to the fact that it's a political ploy that the ANC is doing. Let's remember that, be that as it may, it simply means that the neo-colonial state of South Africa is acting in a particular way. And so the issue is that the liberals and the conservatives, it's they who hold political power. The state, the African state, or the African states are under their control. And we have to get back that state. You see, if we control the state, then we can act with respect to Cameroon, DRC, Congo, and so on and so forth. If we don't control the state, where will we get the power from to effect the change within? So yeah, you are spot on. The other thing I want to mention, so that we all know, is that the Vatican has since, I don't know if we know, has since formally rejected the doctrine of discovery. So the Vatican has formally come out to reject that doctrine, and they've said that and they came out because of indigenous demands. So they came out and they've rejected this. And these are the theories backed by the 15th century Papal Bulls that legitimized. So I'm reading from the Vatican's, I think, website also, under the Vatican's website or the PBS website here. So anyway, so the Vatican itself, the Pope itself, has now repudiated the doctrine. So we are in. I think we are on the right track. Thank you. Right, the floor is still open. Please feel free to comment. Thank you. Although we do finish at 9 o'clock, we are very strict with time. Unfortunately, we don't do African time. Sorry, but Ajete, you've only got 1 minute. Thank you, because we have to bring the meeting to a close. Brother Sam's hand is also up. Ajete, come, and then Brother Sam can come, and then we will end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, for our lands, I think they are still in possession of our lands. They are very much in possession of our lands, because we are not able to do anything with ourselves, right? Now, the question of sovereignty. our armies seem to be in fraternity with the armies of our enemies. Because we don't have our own guns, we don't have our own bombs, we don't even make our own bullets. Everything we get from them, we are not able to fight these people. We can never fight them. We can't win a war with them. They have our land. We need permission to do everything that we do. Even in Ghana, we say we are independent. We don't need independence. We need interdependence.
Thank you.
That's what we need. Africa needs to unite. Africa must unite. And that's the only solution, that we build our own guns and face these people. There's no other solution.
There's a story that the Germans were teaching Africans to make guns in Ghana anyway, then Gold Coast. And that is why the British and others were against the Germans. Because the Germans, as you know, they make things, they're entrepreneurs, they create things, they're industrialists. So when they came to the Gold Coast, they started teaching our people how to make things, including guns. And there is a place in my country, in fact, where I come from, there's a family that make guns, and they were taught by the Germans. Anyway, the story is that the British they really like the idea of teaching Africans how to make guns and so on. But yeah, if we have a united Africa, we can set up our own gun factories and so on and so forth. Thank you, Brother Sam.
Thank you, brothers, and thanks for the presentation, Brother Pigeon. I just wanted to add to what was said by the previous speakers. I think the issue of mental freedom, I think this is the gist, because if Kwame Nkrumah had identified that in 1957, it influenced other African leaders in the continent. And that's where our founding father, Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, when he established the Pan-Africanist Congress of South Africa, then which we came later to call Azania, he started by saying mental revolution. The Black African people must find themselves a leadership. At that time, they said he was racist when he said the African struggle in South Africa must be championed and directed by Africans, apart from the white people. And that's where the ruling or then the leading people in the African National Congress could not agree with that, because at that time they had already admitted other white liberals into the African National Congress. So that's how this situation affected our struggle. And therefore, without this mental freedom and liberation, we also fail to determine what is our end state of a revolution. For instance, the South African Liberation War was terminated abruptly, and the PAC, being Pan-Africanist, realized and knew that we are not going to get true liberation in South Africa. The struggle has not come to its logical conclusion. The enemy is still full force in power. But the African National Congress, which already had been compromised in 1955 when the Freedom Charter, which came from Britain basically, by the white liberals that they have included in our struggle, compromised. And now, this is where I'm going. Then we were pressurized by the frontline states and people in the African Union, then OAU, to say the Pan-African Congress, you either go and be part of that negotiation, or we are closing our countries for you. So this is another issue. We need to be able to determine what is our end state in this revolution or struggle that we are involved in. And it stems from the total mental freedom and liberation. Thanks.
Right. So the time now is 9:03. Unfortunately, we are very strict with time in our class. But I see Brother Cornelson is up. Brother Pigeon, who did the presentation, hasn't come back with further comments because he's heard what you've all said. And as he presented, he must be allowed to come back and say a few words before we close. Brother Pigeon, are you ready to come back with a few further comments before we close? So once you are getting ready, let me get Brother Cornell. Let me allow Brother Cornell to. Brother Cornell, very quickly, yeah?
Yes,
you.
I will be very brief. I think it was Steve Biko. I don't know if it's true, but I heard that Steve Biko said the greatest weapons in the mind, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed.
Mm.
We've got lots of minds. We don't have a lot of money, but we've got lots of minds. It's a nice, cheap way. It's all theoretical, nice, cheap revolution of the mind.
Mm. Thank you very much. Brother Pigeon, you've heard everything. Come out with your final comments, and then we can bring the meeting to a close. The time is 9:04. We are 4 minutes past our end time. Brother Pigeon?
Thank you very much, Brother Kwame, for that opportunity, and for members who have joined us today. We appreciate your presence today. To my driving factor to the last comment of this is that I wanted to bring out to members through this presentation on the possession of our material well-being. And when you talk of materialist position, we demand that we must take keen note on our material possession. Our wealth has been looted and is still being looted, but we are not talking deeply about it. We are not talking deeply about it. In fact, our current states are even inviting them to continue looting our possessions. We are so busy talking about praying for them, forgiving them, and investing our wealth in heaven, which we don't know if we really will die and find it there. But we as a class must change the mindset of the people to start thinking on how do we protect our material, our resources for our own betterment, because we will never develop with the aids they give us after taking our resources. Our resources is building them, then you are going to ask them to give us loan from the resources they have taken from us. That must be the start shift of our mind. And therefore, reclaiming and claiming our material possession must be actually at the plight of every African. And we must know how they use their idealist position in their spirituality and their religion and their mission and everything else to possess our property. So this is a wake-up call to all of us. Moving forward, we must liberate our mind from that thinking that actually by praying, the land will come back fast. We must go for our land first, protect our land first, then either pray so that it forever be protected, but we must do efforts. So us as a class, we still instill this position that we advocate that our material well-being come first before anything else. And we must move that direction. Before we build mosques, before we build churches, before we do anything else, can we fight back for our land? Can we fight back to protect our resources that are continuously exploited and is not benefiting us? So as a summation, it's not our call as an individual, but it's a call of all of us from wherever we are. Are we ready to fight for our material possession? Or we are still ready to feel our spiritual being? It's a mindset call. So we as a class looking forward to work with relevant people and concerned individuals to move forward this conversation forward. You don't have just conversation for conversation. Our class is a thought and action. We think, then act. So action call for all of us and positive action for all of us. Thank you very much, Brother Kwame.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we are bringing the meeting to a close. Formally, it's 9:07. Let me end by reading Nkrumah's text again on the Day of Independence. As I pointed out, quote unquote, and as I pointed out, from now on today, we must change our attitudes and our minds. We must realize that from now on, we are no longer a colonial, but a free and independent people. It is for this reason that we, the Consensus Study Group, meet on Thursdays to work on attitudes and minds through the reading of Consensusism. It's the same reason why we hold the Saturday classes, again, to continue working on attitudes and minds. So thank you all for coming. We wish you a nice weekend. If you are able to, please join our WhatsApp group. And also, if you are able to, please join us on Thursdays where we have our classes and attempt to shape attitudes and minds. Thank you all and good night.
Good night.
Beautiful.
All.